I'll just give you the background. I'm obviously older than the usual intern, but I am
Yes.
indeed an intern here at the LA Times, and I'm working on a story on the California red-legged frog, in
Okay.
particular in the Santa Monica Mountains, where it was reintroduced in an attempt to recover its original habitat there. And apparently there was some significant successes with that. And then unfortunately the fire last year kind of obliterated that. And
Okay.
um, I would say the point of my piece is to talk about sort of the residual effects of the fire and kind of how you don't even at the time realize all the different things it affects. But it's a chance to talk more broadly about habitat and environment. And I was just doing some general research just to get oriented. I'm really just starting this piece. When I found Save the Frogs and thought it was a really cool organization. And so
Cool.
I just,
Thank you.
was doing that. And so I decided to reach out and say hello and see if I could get you to tell me a little bit about the background of the organization and your interest in frogs. And maybe you can give me some ideas as to how to pursue the piece that I'm working on.
So let's see. Yeah, I founded Save the Frogs in 2008, and we officially moved to California in 2010. And we had an office in Santa Cruz until 2013, and then we had a office and retail location in Berkeley for a little over a year after that.
Yeah.
As far as the California red-legged frog goes, I guess my first actions, though somewhat indirect, related to the California red-legged frog is that I've been, or Save the Frogs has been campaigning since at least May of 2010 to get the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and Fish and Game Commission to stop issuing permits for the importation of non-native American bullfrogs, which are coming into the state at least 2 million animals per year. Even though the department and the Fish and Game Commission have both acknowledged and even reported on the fact that those frogs are incredibly harmful. So they eat California red-legged frogs, among other things. Anywhere there's California red-legged frogs, if they have to also deal with American bullfrogs, they're going to have trouble. If they're in a place like Santa Monica Mountains, where, from my understanding, the California red-legged frog originally went all the way from Northern California down to Mexico, and
Yeah.
then most of its Southern California populations disappeared, or at least were so small that they were not known to scientists for quite some time. So if you're in that kind of situation where clearly something's wrong with the environment, and then a fire comes through and you're expecting to recover, if you then have an added threat, we'll call it an unnecessary threat, such as a non-native American bullfrog that the politicians of California are actually giving out permits so that 2 million more of them come into the state every single year, then you're going to have a lot of trouble recovering after a fire. With each additional threat, it's going to become that much more difficult to recover after a fire. So
What's been
yeah,
the
I've been
pushback, Kerry? What's been the pushback
um,
against your idea?
bureaucracy and apathy.
It's not
There may
money.
be something, I don't know, because they don't tell me what's really going on. I don't hear from Chuck Bonham, the head of Fish and Wildlife, saying, Kerry, actually, there's these rich people in, San Francisco with private interest, and they're making sure that I don't take action. He's not going to tell me anything like
I'm
that,
not
so I
saying
never
that, right?
know. All I know is that they don't do anything. They always talk about doing something. They never do anything. They give excuses for, oh, it would, violate this if we stopped issuing permits. And they come up with all kinds of reasons, and they always kind of delay. They say, okay, well, like, let's have a meeting. Let's have a, like right now, they're having stakeholder meetings. Now, this is after, like, literally, like, for 20 years, people have been going to their meetings telling them to do something about it. 10 years ago, actually, in 2010, we won that vote 3-2 to have the Fish and Game Commission
Yeah.
stop, to have them tell the DFW to stop issuing permits. And a couple months later, the pro bullfrog people, will say the people who represent people who like to eat bullfrogs, they somehow got the Fish and Game Commission to have another vote. Like, oh wait, we didn't know that vote was happening, and then it got overturned, or nothing ever happened. Okay, and then so the years go by. Eventually, it wasn't until 2015 that the DFW actually acknowledged that bullfrogs were a problem. So to me, that was a significant step, to have the government actually acknowledge and admit to the fact that it's a problem. So their own scientists put out a very detailed report that's very clear in that bullfrogs are a huge problem. So that was 4 years ago, but still nothing
Is that
has
something I
happened.
can find, by the way?
I can send it to you, and probably if you, I'll send it to you. Just write a note and send me a reminder to send
Yeah,
it
I
to
will
you.
do. I definitely will do that.
Yeah, we have tons of info on the bullfrog campaign on our site, in different places. Um,
Great.
yeah, so then we'll say a couple years went by before they had a hearing in which they instructed, like they already have all the info, they already know all the sides, because every couple months they have a public hearing and people come and say, I think this, I think that. They've heard it all, heard it all, heard it all, and yet 2 years ago they decided to hold stakeholder meetings to find out what the people thought, even though they already know what the people think, and they already know what the scientists think, because the science is very clear, even their own scientists. So to me, I was like, that's a complete waste of time and money. So anyway, they were supposed to have a report from all those meetings, like the final conclusion 1 year after the date. So now we're about 2 years later, and they still haven't had the first meeting. They talk about having the first meeting. They claim they had. They kind of split it up, and they're kind of like meeting in seclusion. Like, let's have all the government people meet together, and then we'll have the nonprofit people meet together. Now, I have a friend in the government who's on. He's working to
Yeah.
get the bullfrog importation stopped. So he's told me they had their first meeting. I think he said that, or I'm pretty sure they had it. I don't think too much came from it, and but for everyone else, like outside the government, no meeting has taken place, and they're writing us about setting up a meeting. Like, it's really hard to set up a meeting. How hard is it to set up a meeting? But anyway, what I'm getting at, without going too far into it, is like, that was 2 years ago when they started a process that never needed to take place, to maybe
Yeah.
just pacify us and delay and delay. So I don't know what's going on, but you're welcome to. I mean, they probably won't talk to you. I assume politicians don't like to talk, but who knows what they would say? I can tell you who the important people would be, but really, yeah, I don't have any faith in the DFW or the FGC. I think it would be something that comes from like an assembly member with an actual bull to change the law. But from my experience, and I've talked to a lot of politicians in the state, most politicians have higher on their mind than frogs, and
Yeah,
you
sure.
know they've got
What
enough
about,
going on.
is there evidence that the non-Native American bullfrog is in this Southern California area in the wild?
I don't have a map of them, but I think if you go onto the California trying to remember the name of it, like
Uh,
CANND, California Natural History Database, like California State maintains a
yeah.
database of records of all types of animal sightings. I'm sure it's all over.
Like,
So
you know what? Have you ever seen that
I'm
thing?
not familiar with I'm not familiar with the Santa Monica Mountains, but the bullfrog is very widespread.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the website iNaturalist?
I have.
What do you
Yeah,
think
I
of
mean
that?
that it I think a lot of people like it. I don't personally
Yeah.
use it because I don't usually have a need for it, but I know it's a well-known site. I'm sure they've got hundreds of thousands of records because it's pretty well known. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't personally use it, so I can't really give you too many details. But I'm sure you can go on there, type in California bullfrog, or sorry, California American bullfrogs, and I'm sure records will come up.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Can you talk a little bit more about what led you to the organization? You were the founder?
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you about the California red-legged frog too. But yeah, I am the founder. I had a love of nature growing up, not specifically frogs, and I wanted to protect the planet, natural resources, natural areas, wildlife, and in 1996, I went to Hawaii and volunteered with graduate students from the University of Hawaii studying endangered birds. And from that experience, I confirmed that I wanted to return to the academic world and do my PhD. So
Hmm.
eventually, based on hearing that frogs were disappearing and my love of hanging out at streams, I thought that frogs would be a good study subject. So I went to Australia for 4 years, did my PhD research on chytridiomycosis, which is the most significant disease of amphibians and is regarded as the most harmful disease ever known to humans, in that it's driven about 200 amphibian species to complete extinction, which is far more species extincts than any other known diseases caused for any type of organism. So
Wow.
chytridiomycosis is a huge problem, and that's one of the main problems with the American bullfrogs. Is that one study showed that 62% of the American bullfrogs coming into California that they sampled were infected with the chytrid fungus that causes chytridiomycosis, the disease in recorded history. So if we take 62% of 2 million, we can assume that there's at least 1 million infected bullfrogs coming into the state each year, and that is no surprise because if you look at the bullfrog shipments, they're packing huge numbers of bullfrogs into buckets or tubs. So all the frogs are crawling all over each other in
Where are they
the
coming from?
sinker. Most of them are coming from Asia, but they potentially could be coming from many different countries.
Mm.
Brazil and Uruguay have active bullfrog farms, but I'm based on the fact that most of these incoming bullfrogs are going to Chinatown. Then most of them are probably coming from China, Taiwan,
Hmm.
but they're coming from far away places where they're raised in farms. A frog farm is a place where you try to raise as many frogs as you can in as small an area as possible. And that's a perfect condition for a skin disease, like a waterborne skin disease such as chytridiomycosis. So they're basically breeding grounds for a disease, and then they ship them to America, and there's no disease requirements or quarantine, though the DFW does according to their permit. Their permit money should be going to surveillance. The DW officers should be going to those places requiring checks for disease, and if they're disease, then they doing something about it, and they don't. So the DFW gives out the
Crazy.
permits, but they have zero, and they know that the frogs are diseased, and they're not going out there and doing anything about it, and yet they're continuing to give out the permits.
And there's no health problem
Um,
for people that eat them if they're cooked?
well, bull they can like a couple of years ago I read about one of those. Probably the importation company banned, or maybe the FDA holds a list of companies you're not allowed to buy from because maybe they had salmonella. So
Yeah.
chytridiomycosis is not going to affect humans that we know of because chytrid fungus cannot survive at human body temperature. It needs cooler
I see.
temperatures. So, if it were causing human problems, there'd be tens of millions of dollars going to dealing with the problem. But it's not killing humans, so it seems to be a low priority for politicians. But yeah, bullfrogs occasionally have salmonella and various diseases that
Yeah.
could affect humans, but you know, cook,
So if they're being
cook.
imported though largely for food, how do they get loose and get out into the habitat?
Culturally, a lot of the people buying them want live bullfrog. They want it fresh. So um, part of the permit requirements is that every store must have a posted notice saying you can't take a live bullfrog out of here. You know, it's got to be killed here. But from my, we'll say, from anecdotal, from
Yeah.
people have said, the kind of people who are very into the problem and go kind of scope out the vendors. They say people walk in there, probably ask for it to go and get it to go. And then there's also Buddhist groups, and we'll just say religious people who think that it's their karma. I'm probably mixing Buddhism and no, I guess that is Buddhist slash Hindu.
Right.
It's their good karma to go and save some animals. So what they do is go and buy some animals that are destined to death, and then they'll go out to a place like I know it happened in Santa Cruz 5 or 6 years ago. They go and release the bullfrogs thinking they're doing a good job, a good service to the
Yeah.
world. And
Yeah.
then there goes the bullfrog. But then there's also bullfrogs that come in as pets. And they, it's not a number one pet, that's for certain. It's not the highest sought after pet, but you can buy it. And
Yeah.
there's tadpoles that you can buy. And there's teachers who get bullfrogs for dissections. And theoretically, they're coming in dead, but you can get online and order a bullfrog. So, it's probably number one is probably the food
Yeah.
industry. Certainly, as far as permits go, that's number one. It's for food. So, most of them probably don't make it out. But also, where does their water go? Their water goes out into the environment, and the water is where the chytrid fungus, there's billions and billions of zoospores when you dump out a gallon of infected water. So that's something they're not sanitizing the water that the bullfrogs were held in. And then there's just, it's like eventually a natural disaster comes and the fire burns down the building, or the hurricane comes, or whatever. Earthquake comes and the building walls break, and there goes all the animals. That's it's only a matter of time before animals escape. That's just the way animals escape.
Yeah. Yep.
So I did Australian, did my PhD there for 4 years, learned all about frogs and amphibian conservation, and saw um, a lack of scientific recommendations being implemented by the outside world, and a lack of public knowledge about the fact that amphibians are the most rapidly disappearing group of animals in the world. And there was no nonprofit organization dedicated exclusively to protecting amphibians. So when I returned to America in 2008, I started Save the Frogs as a way to fix those problems, especially everything that needed to get done, or we'll say a large number of things that need to get done outside of academia. At the time, to my estimate, there were probably 2,000 amphibian biologists in the world, and almost everything happening amphibian conservation wise was in, just university researchers, not much
Yeah.
knowledge at all in the outside world. Fortunately, these days, because of Save the Frogs and other organizations and the proliferation of internet knowledge, certainly a lot more people know about the plight of amphibians, but it's
Yeah.
not like it's. I'm sure if you go out and take a survey in the streets, leave LA, leave San Francisco for certain, and go to places where there's not many environmentalists. But even if you walk around LA, I bet there's not more than 10% of people who know amphibians are in trouble.
Yeah.
So, it's one of the world's most significant environmental problems. If you ask anyone, hey, have you ever heard of global warming? Everyone's heard of it. Everyone knows about it, whether or not they believe it. But for amphibians, most people don't know about it. And if people don't know that there's a problem, then it's hard to fix the problem, because people aren't going to improve their ecological footprint.
Yeah.
Politicians aren't going to take action, and corporations aren't going to take action. So, Save the Frogs. We've always, primarily been environmental education, because I consider environmental education to be the basis of all environmental conservation. So, yeah, we have a lot of educational events that happen. We've held over 2,000 events in about 60 countries. And we've also done various other actions. We've built wetlands. We had an active wetland construction and restoration program in California for several years, and we'd hold wetland construction workshops
Mhm.
We've built, I think, 29 wetlands, but then we've also inspired many people to build generally smaller, like frog ponds on private property or at their schools. And we've had various campaigns in California successfully. We got AB 2364 was the bill. It got passed. Manuel Perez was the assembly member in charge of that. That made the California red-legged frog the official state frog of
Oh,
California.
you were responsible for pursuing that?
I am, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Had you heard of that? Or that's probably what the NWF article was that you saw. Is that right?
I saw that. No, the article I saw was a huge study about the recovery plan.
Okay.
Um, but I did know that it was the California frog, but I didn't know where that came from.
Yeah, we have a page. It's savethefrogs.com/AB dash. There was a school in Southern California near Salton Sea. So way out in the middle of nowhere, mostly like migrant farm workers, kids. And the teacher contacted me saying they wanted to help out with frogs, and we decided kids write their politicians to get that frog listed. And then
Yeah.
I went down with another Save the Frogs biologist to their school and presentations, and Manuel Perez's staff was there. And then he introduced the legislation. We went to Sacramento. A couple of the kids went to Sacramento, their teachers and superintendent, and we all gave speeches. And we won that first vote 8-0, and then the next vote 52-8. And it got signed into law by Governor Jerry Brown. So, yeah, I thought just the fact that it passed 8-0 in 52-8, I never hear about anything in this day and age that has that kind of support. So I thought that was really awesome, and that kind of was a reminder that kids can get a lot done. Because I'm sure if I had gone myself, he wants frog, whatever, go away. Right. But when kids show up, they can get a lot done.
Why did you think it was that it would be a good, particular amphibian to be recognized by the state?
Well, it's got California in the name. It's endangered, and it has a cultural link to California in that it's the frog. I don't think it was stated by name, but it's the frog that Mark Twain wrote about in the celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. Now, to come back to bullfrogs, Calaveras County has a famous frog jump, and actually at the Sacramento Capitol every year, I'm guessing at the same time of year, the politicians hold a little media event where they jump frog, and that's the American bullfrog that they're jumping. And they probably don't even realize that that is not the celebrated jumping frog of Calaveras County, and that is actually harming that frog. And there was maybe 40 or 50 years ago, some politician must have thought it would be a good idea to introduce legislation that says something to the effect of you can jump a frog at a jumping frog contest and nobody can take that right away from you. So that's currently a law in California. Don't quote me precisely like that, but I can find you the law,
I can figure that out. Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So this law has been used as an excuse by the DFW, like we can't do anything because there's a law that says someone's allowed to jump a frog. It doesn't state you're allowed to jump a California red-legged frog. It doesn't say you're allowed to jump a American bullfrog. It just says, generally speaking, no one can stop you from jumping a frog at a contest. Okay? So they use that as an excuse to say, we can't. I'll take it back a step further and say that I don't even want them. It's not even the issuing of the permits. That was our original thing. Let's get them to stop issuing permits. Then, when I found out that there's already prohibited frog species in the state of California and salamanders, there's a list of prohibited wildlife, of which there's already some, like, I believe poison dart frogs, definitely cane toads, and a couple other species. I'll say the one, I can't remember if it's poison dart frogs, but definitely cane toads are on there. There's amphibians already prohibited because they're harmful species. the DFW is the organization that's responsible for putting species onto that list. So they do have the authority to put it on there.
Yeah.
So I, with the Center for Biological Diversity, Save the Frogs, sent in a petition to the state saying we're petitioning you to add American bullfrogs to the list. There's not much to it. All you do is insert one line into the code that says American bullfrogs are now part of this list.
Yeah.
So their response was,
We'll have a meeting.
well, at first it was like, and I can't remember if this was in their written response, but one of their people told me, I can't, maybe it was in the written response, but like, it would violate other existing code, that being the code, but nothing in that code that says you can't add a species to that list,
Yeah.
or that if even if the species is on the list, hey, you'll still be able to jump it, but you're not going to be able to sell it, and you're not going to be able to buy and sell and import. So that juice, even if someone still has their own stock of bullfrogs and they go jump it, whatever, but at least there's not 2 million coming into the state every year.
Yeah.
So it was based on that petition that we're forced to discuss it at their meetings, and their solution was, I think I can't remember if they ever issued a final, like, the petition has been denied, but basically their solution was, oh, we'll have stakeholder meetings and figure out what to do. So this was years ago when I sent in the petition, and they haven't had the first stakeholder meeting. Yeah,
Frustrating.
so
It's very frustrating.
yeah, I mean, that's why it's 9 years later. I went to the meeting and spoke May of 2010, and they had the vote to stop issuing permits. They never did anything about it, and they're still issuing the permits. So
Why
that's
is
why, I
it
mean,
why is it that something called the American bullfrog is non-native?
because it's native to the eastern half of U.S. and Canada.
But why is it
They
then
origin
being
well
shipped
here,
in
yeah.
China?
So it's all this is all connected. The California red-legged frogs nearly got eaten to extinction in the 1890s by the California gold miners. So they had for some reason, French culture was popular, so they all started eating frog. It's a free food, and they were probably camped out just camp frogs, because California red-legged frog is the largest frog native to California, maybe even to the west of the U.S., but definitely the largest native frog in California. So they started eating these frogs, and then it became rare. And to make up for this loss of food, an entrepreneur imported American bullfrogs into California, started farming them, not any kind of closed container, and the bullfrogs spread.
Wow. How many bullfrogs are there, American bullfrogs are there in California? Is any estimate?
I never see any kind of estimates for an amphibian population size unless it's a critically endangered species
Yeah.
whose
Yeah.
population is like, there's like less than 2,000 individuals, or there's 28 individuals. So it's millions. I think it's been, for the cane toads in Australia, it's been estimated at hundreds of millions. And they got to Australia, I think, in 1935. So they're very similar species in that they lay huge amounts of eggs, and they can deal with lots of different environmental conditions. Like the bullfrog is a problem because they will hold the chytrid fungus. They will be infected, but they usually don't die from it, which makes them perfect vectors. And also, larger amphibians generally have larger home ranges or dispersal abilities because they've got big legs. They can jump far and travel far. So you've got these, and also bullfrogs will stay as tadpoles. Potentially, they'll overwinter as tadpoles. The tadpoles will have chytrid on their mouth parts, but they won't die. And then they're in the water all year long. So you've got chytrid in the water all year long. And then you've got these frogs that aren't going to die from chytrid and that jump a long way and spread their disease all over, and they're not getting eaten by other frogs, or they'll get eaten by certain animals, but if you're a normal frog, there's potentially other frogs eating you, but the
When you
bullfrog is
say
the
that,
biggest thing out there.
when you say a frog eating another frog, you mean they're eating
Yeah.
the larva, they're eating the
Now,
tadpole?
frogs will eat frogs are gape-limited predators. They'll eat whatever they can fit in their mouth. So the
Wow.
bullfrog, the other problem aside from the fact that they're chytrid vectors, is that they're eating and competing with native wildlife, in particular the frogs. They're not just eating frogs, though. They're eating birds, they're eating snakes, it's whatever they can catch. The bullfrog is the largest frog in North America. It's got a large mouth, and they'll eat whatever they can put in their mouth. So one bullfrog was found with a 33-inch garter snake in its stomach. So they have
Jeez.
huge appetites, and they can eat California red-legged frogs. And then they're also competing for food resources with the native amphibians. They're competing for breeding sites. They're, probably filling up the air with loud noises that's creating noise pollution for other frogs. And for frogs to be calling is a dangerous and energy intensive activity. So, they cause all types of problems for native wildlife.
Do people find it unusual that an organization called Save the Frogs is passionate about getting rid of
Stopping
bullfrogs?
bullfrogs?
Yeah,
I don't think so. And I mean, that's not all we do. It's just when it comes to
of course.
California, to me, like stopping the importation of bullfrogs is one of the simplest ways that California could improve its environment. It's just one line of text in some code would, in an email sent out to the current permit holders saying, sorry, no more permits, would stop the influx of millions of one of the world's most endangered species. So that's a whole lot easier than how are we going to put $50 million into improving our,
Right.
climate and pollution and all that. Those are $100 million programs, but to stop bullfrogs coming in, that's like easy win for the state if only they actually took action. So, but yeah, I mean, there are people out there who go out and kill bullfrogs, and the state of California pays the price for the bullfrogs because the bullfrogs are any company that's affected by endangered wildlife on their property, that's hindered by the fact that there's endangered wildlife on their property. No one wants endangered wildlife. It's probably bad for business to have endangered wildlife, and the state of California has a responsibility to save threatened listed species. So, it costs the state money to have to continually create problems for endangered frogs is, it's bad for business and it's bad for the
Yeah.
state. And I'm pretty sure the state pays for it, but there's definitely like companies have to pay for it. Someone's paying for it because I know someone whose job it is to go out there and remove bullfrogs in the maybe Carmel River. There's a huge bullfrog problem. So, it happens all over. Nonprofits spend their time restoring habitat, which may include removal of non-native species. And save the frogs. Like, we don't organize any public like frog hunts or anything like that because it is kind of a, it's an animal rights issue. Like the bullfrogs didn't choose to be there. So,
Yeah.
we may give recommendations like, hey, yeah, if you have bullfrogs at your pond, if you can remove them, probably do that. But we don't do it
Yeah.
ourselves as an organization.
Is there I mean, I think since they live on the East Coast, there is some potential for migration here in the absence of importation?
Nah, because they have to cross the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains and the deserts, and it's just too far. Generally,
Not on their own power.
aside from birds, most terrestrial wildlife species usually has a fairly limited home range. Like if you're a deer, a white-tailed deer will go all the way from Massachusetts down to Costa Rica, but that's because they're huge and they can travel
Yeah.
long distances. But things like frogs, it's rare to have a frog that has, American bullfrogs will go, I don't know how far north, they go up to Canada. I mean, they're a large frog, but if you start looking at smaller frogs, range of species is usually, I don't know, I mean, it'll change for all species, but, the state of Virginia or this, put two states together, and usually the frogs will hang out in those couple states because climate changes, ecological conditions change, mountain ranges block motion. So yeah, frogs usually have a pretty narrow home range, but the bullfrog is definitely like Mississippi River, more or less eastward.
Well, you've been great to spend so much time with me. This is fascinating, just fascinating. I'm
Thank
so
you.
happy that
Well, I appreciate the interview and that you're interested in the topic. And if you get an article in the LA Times, that would be awesome. And definitely mention Save the
great,
Frogs. It would be cool.
for sure.
There's one other that I should tell you is, as I mentioned, we had an active wetland program, which we're working on restoring our wetland program. But we would go up to schools and private landowners' land and all to federal property, specifically the El Dorado National Forest, and teamed up, we'll say, the good government agencies, the ones who were actively working to improve the environment. That was like U.S. Forest Service, national parks, USFWS, and local agencies too. So we built with them. We were not the only group, but we helped build wetlands in El Dorado National Forest, which it had been, I think, about 50 years, or we'll say decades, since a California red-legged frog had been seen in that forest. And within a year of us building those wetlands, the frogs were making use. They were back in the forest.
So you didn't introduce the frog there. It just it.
No,
You
we never
created the
we
wetland.
never introduce. Yeah, we never introduce frogs. The goal with those ponds outside of the forest, maybe even that's why it had been chosen, is that a private landowner living outside the forest had red-legged frogs on her property. So the goal would be to move to the closest ideal location
Yeah.
within the dispersal range of the frogs. We never introduce frogs because we don't want to transfer diseases moving frogs around. And also, we assume that if the habitat is good, then the frogs will show up there.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you're talking about a huge swath of Southern California where no frogs have been sighted, for years, and the closest frog is 200 miles away, that's a different story. But
Yeah.
ideally, you'd kind of your known habitat and start extending from
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Well, this has been terrific, Kerry. I really appreciate it.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'll send you a recording of this.
Great.
And
Great.
if I ever wanted to use the recording, what would you think of that? Until an LA Times article came out, or it doesn't matter
Yeah.
to you?
I mean, we both agreed to record it, and we can both have a copy of it.
Okay. All right, good. And what is your expectation for an LA Times article? Like, how likely is it that it would come out, and when do you think if it does come out?
Those are good questions. If I were higher in the pecking order than an intern, I would probably have a better answer. But I think it's reasonably likely, and I'm working on it now, so it's not going to take forever.
Okay. All
But I'll
right.
let you know for sure.
I have a question for you. How did you become an intern, and were you a lawyer, or is there another person with the
Yeah.
same name who's a lawyer? Because I
No,
typed
no,
your
no.
name into Google and it came up a lawyer.
Right. I am a lawyer, and I practiced, had a full career in Philadelphia as a litigator and as a government lawyer for 35 years. And then I started writing full time, and then I got into this program at Stanford for people that are, have had a career but are not finished. And I got interested in journalism, and so what the hell? Interviewed, and I
So
got
are
the
you
job.
currently still at that, like, is this internship part of your Stanford program?
I was not part of it, but they came and interviewed. They interviewed people on campus, and that's when I interviewed. And I decided based on how much I liked it, I'm going back to Stanford as a master's student in journalism, starting in September.
Okay, good.
So I'm in a
All right,
one-year
well,
program up there.
Good. Congratulations for that.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks.
Well, keep me posted, and if you ever have any questions about amphibians, then
Great.
definitely.
And I may have a couple of follow-up things, and I'll just email you.
Okay, and also
Thanks so
send
much
me
for your
out
time.
like a request for those links.
Yeah, I will. Thanks
Okay.
so much.
All right,
Appreciate
Joe.
it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.